Nina's hands trembled as she thumped the keys into the lock for the third time. The metal slipped against frozen fingers, and she cursed under her breath. Inside her apartment, the radiator would be barely warm, the fridge nearly empty, and the medical bills from her brother's latest hospital stay would still be sitting on the counter, screaming numbers she couldn't afford to look at. She finally got the door open and stepped inside, but something stopped her from closing it. Through the window, she could see them, a man and two small girls huddled on the bench across the street, their breath visible in the freezing air. Nina pressed her forehead against the cold glass. She should go inside. She should mind her own business. She had enough problems without adding someone else's to the pile. But her mother's voice echoed in her head, the same words she'd heard 1,000 times growing up. If you have even a little to give, you give it. Nina grabbed her coat and headed back out into the snow. The man looked up as she approached, his eyes wary but desperate. Two little girls, maybe 5 years old, sat pressed against his sides, their faces pale and their lips tinged blue. "I'm sorry to bother you," Nina said, her voice barely audible over the wind. "But you all look freezing. I have a small apartment just across the street. It's not much, but it's warm. You could stay the night." The man's expression shifted from suspicion to disbelief. "You're offering us your home? You don't even know us." "I know you're cold," Nina said simply, "and I know those girls need somewhere warm to sleep." He studied her face for a long moment, then glanced down at his daughters. One of them sneezed, and that seemed to make up his mind. "My name is David Matthews. These are my daughters, Lily and Ella. He paused, swallowing hard. "We were evicted from our apartment this morning. I've been trying to find a shelter, but they're all full." Nina nodded, not trusting herself to speak. She could see the shame in his eyes, the weight of failure that came with not being able to provide for your children. She knew that weight. She'd been carrying her own version of it for months. "Come on," she said softly. "Let's get you all inside before you freeze." The apartment was exactly as she'd left it, small, cramped, and barely warm enough. David's eyes took in the peeling wallpaper, the second-hand furniture, the stack of bills on the counter. Nina felt a flush of embarrassment, but she pushed it down. At least it was shelter. At least it was something. "The bathroom is through there," she said, pointing down the short hallway. "There are clean towels in the cabinet. Why don't you help the girls warm up while I heat some soup?" David hesitated, then nodded. "Thank you. I don't know how to thank you." "Don't worry about it," Nina said, turning toward the kitchen before he could see the tears threatening at the corners of her eyes. She heard the bathroom door close and the sound of running water. In the kitchen, she pulled out the pot of vegetable soup she'd made 2 days ago, stretching it to last the week. She'd have to add more water, make it go further, but that was okay. She'd eaten less before. 20 minutes later, they were all sitting around her tiny kitchen table. The girls had pink in their cheeks again, and David had taken off his inadequate jacket to reveal a threadbare sweater underneath. Nina ladled soup into mismatched bowls and passed around the half-loaf of bread she'd been saving. "This is really good," Lily said, her voice soft and sweet. "Thank you, Miss Nina." "You're welcome, sweetheart," Nina replied, feeling something warm bloom in her chest despite everything. David ate slowly, methodically, like someone who'd gone without food before and knew better than to rush. Nina recognized that too. "How long have you been on your own with them?" she asked quietly. 2 years, David said, not looking up from his bowl. "Their mother, Megan, she died in a car accident. I had a good job, a nice apartment, everything. But after she died, I couldn't focus. I kept missing work, falling behind. Eventually, I lost everything." He glanced at his daughters, who were drawing pictures on a napkin with a pen Nina had given them. "I've been trying to keep it together for them, but some days it feels impossible." Nina felt her throat tighten. "I lost my mother 6 months ago," she said. "Cancer. And my younger brother, he's in and out of the hospital with complications from diabetes. I work at this company, Ridgeway Enterprises, but the pay is terrible and my boss treats me like I'm disposable. Some days I don't know how I'm going to make it through." David looked up at her then, really looked at her, and something passed between them. An understanding, a recognition of shared pain. "But you're still here," he said, "still fighting." "So are you," Nina replied. Ella tugged on Nina's sleeve. Can we sleep here? Tonight? It's really warm. Nina smiled, blinking back tears. Of course you can, honey. You can sleep in my bed, and I'll take the couch. We can't take your bed, David protested. You can and you will, Nina said firmly. The girls need proper rest. End of discussion. After dinner, Nina helped the girls brush their teeth with a spare toothbrush she'd never opened and settled them into her bed. They looked so small under her faded comforter, curled up together like two halves of the same person. Lily reached out and grabbed Nina's hand. You're nice, she said sleepily. Like an angel. Nina's vision blurred. Sleep tight, sweetheart. In the living room, David was folding himself into the corner of the couch, trying to take up as little space as possible. I'll be gone first thing in the morning, he said. I don't want to impose. Where will you go? Nina asked. He didn't answer, which was an answer in itself. Nina sat down on the other end of the couch, pulling a thin blanket over her legs. You don't have to leave right away. At least stay until you figure something out. Why are you doing this? David asked, his voice rough with emotion. You don't know us. We could be anyone. Because someone helped me once when I needed it. Nina lied. The truth was, no one had helped her. She'd fought through everything alone, drowning in medical debt and grief and exhaustion. But she didn't want anyone else to feel that alone. And because those girls deserve better than a bench in the snow. David's face crumpled, and for a moment Nina thought he might cry. But he pulled himself together, his jaw tightening. I'm going to pay you back someday. I don't know how, but I will. Just take care of your daughters, Nina said softly. That's payment enough. They sat in silence for a while, listening to the radiator clank and the wind howl outside. Eventually, exhaustion pulled Nina under, and she fell asleep with her head against the arm of the couch, not knowing that the man sharing her tiny apartment would soon change her life in ways she couldn't begin to imagine. The next morning, Nina woke to the smell of coffee. She sat up, disoriented, and found David in her kitchen, using the last of her coffee grounds to brew a pot. The girls were still asleep. I hope you don't mind, he said. I wanted to do something to thank you. It's fine, Nina said, accepting the chipped mug he handed her. She checked the time and swore. I have to get to work. I'm already going to be late. We'll be gone when you get back, David said. I promise we won't be a burden. Nina wanted to argue, but she was already running behind. She grabbed her coat and bag, pausing at the door. Take care of yourself, David. And those girls. You too, Nina. And thank you for everything. Nina rushed through the snow to the bus stop, her mind racing. She'd used the last of her coffee, the last of her bread, and most of her soup. She'd have to make do until payday, which was still 4 days away. But as she climbed onto the bus and found a seat, she realized she didn't regret it, not even a little bit. Work was exactly as miserable as she'd expected. Karen Clark, her boss, was waiting at Nina's desk with a stack of files and a scowl. You're 12 minutes late, Thompson. Again. I'm sorry, Karen. I don't want excuses. I want results. These need to be processed by noon, and then I need you to cover the reception desk because Janice called in sick. Again. Karen dropped the files on Nina's desk with a thud. And try to look professional, would you? This is a business, not a charity. Nina bit back a response and sat down at her computer. Around her, the office buzzed with the usual morning chaos, phones ringing, keyboards clacking, gossip flowing. She'd worked at Ridgeway Enterprises for 3 years, and in that time she'd received exactly one raise of 50 cents an hour. She applied for internal positions regularly, but she was always passed over for someone younger, prettier, or better connected. She was invisible here, disposable. Lunchtime came and went. Nina ate the granola bar she'd found in her desk drawer and kept working. By 3 o'clock, her eyes were burning and her head was pounding. She'd been at the reception desk for 2 hours, smiling at people she didn't know and directing calls she didn't care about. Her phone buzzed with a text from the hospital her brother needed his prescription refilled, which meant another $70 she didn't have. At 5:30, Nina finally clocked out and trudged back to the bus stop. The snow had turned to slush, soaking through her worn-out boots. When she finally made it back to her apartment, she found it empty. David and the girls were gone, just as he'd promised. The only sign they'd been there was the neatly folded blanket on the couch and a piece of paper on the kitchen counter. Nina picked up the note with shaking hands. In careful handwriting it read, "Thank you for giving us hope when we had none. You'll never know what your kindness meant to us. David, Lily, and Ella." Underneath the words was a drawing in crayon, two stick-figure girls holding hands with a woman with curly hair. Nina's chest tightened, and she sank into a chair, the tears she'd been holding back all day finally breaking free. 3 days passed, and Nina couldn't stop thinking about David and his daughters. She wondered if they'd found shelter, if the girls were warm, if they were eating. Every homeless person she passed on her way to work made her heart clench. She'd check her phone obsessively, as if somehow they might call her, even though she'd never given them her number and they'd never given her theirs. Work became increasingly unbearable. On Wednesday, Karen called her into the office and informed her that her request for time off to take her brother to a specialist had been denied. "We're understaffed as it is, Thompson. You'll have to reschedule." "But the appointment took 3 months to get," Nina protested. "He really needs to see this doctor." "Then I suggest you figure it out on your own time," Karen said coldly. "That's all." Nina left the office feeling hollowed out. She called her brother from the bathroom, her voice shaking as she explained she couldn't take him to the appointment. "It's okay, Nina," he said, always trying to make things easier for her. "I'll take an Uber. Don't worry about it." But she did worry. She worried constantly, about everything, until the worry felt like a physical weight pressing down on her chest, making it hard to breathe. That night, she sat at her kitchen table surrounded by bills and bank statements, trying to make the numbers work. They wouldn't. No matter how she moved things around, she was short. The rent was due in a week. Her brother needed his medication, and her credit cards were all maxed out. She put her head in her hands and let herself cry, really cry, for the first time since her mother's funeral. Thursday morning arrived grey and cold. Nina dragged herself through her morning routine, putting on the same black pants and white blouse she wore 3 times a week because they were the only professional clothes she owned that didn't have stains or holes. She was standing at the bus stop when her phone rang. Unknown number. "Hello? Is this Nina Thompson?" a woman's voice asked. "Yes, this is she. This is Margaret from Human Resources at Ridgeway Enterprises. I'm calling to schedule a meeting with you and our CEO. Would you be available tomorrow at 10 a.m.? Nina's heart stopped. "I'm sorry, what? The CEO wants to meet with me?" "Yes, that's correct. It's regarding a potential opportunity within the company. Can you make it tomorrow at 10? Nina's mind raced. She'd never even seen the CEO. She barely knew his name. Ridgeway Enterprises had been bought out 3 weeks ago by some investment firm, and there'd been rumors of a new CEO. But upper management was like a different planet to people at her level. "Yes," she heard herself say. "I can make it." "Excellent. Please come to the executive floor. Security will be expecting you." The line went dead. Nina stood there, phone still pressed to her ear, trying to process what had just happened. Around her, morning commuters pushed past, but she couldn't move. Why would the CEO want to meet with her? Was she being fired? Had she done something wrong? Her mind conjured up a dozen worst-case scenarios as the bus pulled up. At work, Nina couldn't concentrate. She kept glancing at the clock, watching the hours crawl by. She told no one about the meeting, afraid that saying it out loud would somehow make it disappear. Karen piled more work on her desk, and Nina went through the motions mechanically, her thoughts elsewhere. That evening, she stood in front of her closet for 20 minutes, trying to find something appropriate to wear to meet a CEO. Everything looked cheap and worn. Finally, she settled on a navy dress she'd worn to her mother's funeral, paired with the one pair of heels she owned that didn't have scuffed toes. She ironed the dress 3 times, trying to get out wrinkles that wouldn't disappear. Nina barely slept that night. She kept imagining the meeting, preparing answers to questions she didn't know how to anticipate. By the time her alarm went off at 6 a.m., she'd been awake for hours, her stomach churning with anxiety. She arrived at work 30 minutes early and went straight to the bathroom to check her appearance one more time. Her reflection looked pale and nervous, dark circles under her eyes despite the concealer she'd carefully applied. She gave herself a pep talk in the mirror, trying to summon confidence she didn't feel. At 9:55, Nina stepped into the elevator and pressed the button for the executive floor. Her hands were shaking. The elevator rose smoothly, so different from the creaky one that went to her floor. When the doors opened, she stepped into a world she'd never seen. Plush carpets, modern art on the walls, floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the city. A receptionist with perfect makeup and an expensive-looking suit smiled at her. "Nina Thompson?" "Yes, right this way. Mr. Matthews is expecting you." Nina followed her down a hallway, her heels sinking into carpet so thick it felt like walking on clouds. Her heart was hammering so hard she thought it might burst through her chest. The receptionist stopped at a large mahogany door and knocked twice before opening it. "Miss Thompson is here, sir. Send her in." Nina stepped through the door, and her entire world tilted on its axis. Behind the massive desk, wearing an impeccably tailored suit, sat David Matthews, the same man who'd sat on a bench in the snow with his shivering daughters, the same man who'd slept on her couch and used the last of her coffee, the same man she'd given soup to 3 days ago. Their eyes met, and for a long moment, neither of them spoke. Nina's mouth opened, but no sound came out. This had to be a mistake. This had to be some kind of joke. "Please, sit down," David said, his voice gentle but professional. He gestured to the leather chair across from his desk. Nina's legs carried her forward on autopilot. She sank into the chair, her mind racing. You're the CEO?" David's expression softened. "I am. And before you ask, no, I wasn't lying to you that night. Everything I told you was true. My wife died. I lost my job. We were evicted. The only thing I didn't mention was that I'd recently sold my previous company and was in the process of acquiring this one. The eviction happened because I'd been staying in a short-term rental that I forgot to extend while dealing with the acquisition paperwork. I'd sent my assistant home for the holidays, and I was trying to handle everything myself. I made a mistake, and my daughters paid the price." Nina stared at him, trying to reconcile the broken man, on her couch, with the powerful executive sitting across from her. "I don't understand. If you had money, if you were buying a company, why were you on that bench?" "Because in that moment, I was lost," David said quietly. "I'd been so focused on the acquisition, on building something new, that I'd let everything else fall apart. My assistant had been handling our living situation, and when she went on vacation, I didn't realize the rental was expiring. By the time I figured it out, it was late. My daughters were exhausted, and I couldn't get into any hotels because my credit cards were in my other wallet. I was sitting on that bench, holding my girls, feeling like the worst father in the world, and then you appeared." Nina's hands gripped the armrests of the chair. "You could have told me. Would you have helped me if you knew I was wealthy?" David asked. "Or would you have assumed I could handle it myself?" "No." Nina opened her mouth to argue, then closed it. He was right. She probably would have walked past him if she'd known he could afford a hotel. "Why am I here?" she asked instead. David leaned forward, his expression intense. "Because what you did that night changed my perspective on everything. I've spent the last 2 years building walls around myself and my daughters, convinced that we had to do everything alone, that accepting help was weakness. You showed me that kindness isn't about what you can afford to give. It's about choosing to give even when it costs you something. You fed us with food you needed for yourself. You gave us your bed when you could barely afford heat. You did it without expecting anything in return, without even knowing our real names." Nina felt tears pricking at her eyes. "That doesn't explain why you called me here. I did some research on you, Nina Thompson," David continued. "I know you've been working here for 3 years with minimal raises and no promotions. I know your boss treats you poorly and overworks you. I know you've applied for 17 internal positions and been rejected for every single one. I also know you're brilliant at what you do. Your efficiency rating is one of the highest in the company. Your error rate is nearly 0, and every single client you've interacted with has given positive feedback." Nina's cheeks flushed. No one had ever noticed her work before. No one had ever cared. "I'm restructuring this company from the ground up," David said. "When I bought Ridgeway Enterprises, I saw a business that had lost its humanity. Employees treated like numbers, profits prioritized over people, no room for compassion or growth. I want to change that. I want to build a company where people like you aren't overlooked and undervalued. And I want you to help me do it." "I don't understand," Nina whispered. David stood and walked around the desk, sitting on the edge so he was closer to her level. I'm creating a new position, Director of Employee Wellness and Community Outreach. It's a leadership role focused on building programs that support our employees, not just as workers, but as human beings. Mental health resources, childcare assistance, flexible scheduling, community partnerships. I want someone who understands what it's like to struggle, someone who has empathy and compassion, someone who would give their last meal to a stranger. I want you, Nina. The room spun. Nina gripped the chair harder, afraid she might fall. You're offering me a job? A director position, with a salary commensurate with the role, full benefits, and the authority to make real changes. I've already had the offer drawn up. He handed her a folder. Take a look. Nina's hands trembled as she opened it. The number on the first page made her gasp. It was more than triple what she currently made. Enough to pay off her debts. Enough to get her brother proper care. Enough to breathe for the first time in years. This is too much, she said, her voice breaking. I'm not qualified. I don't have an MBA or experience in leadership, or you have something better than qualifications, David interrupted. You have heart. You have integrity. You have the ability to see people as people, not resources. That's what this company needs. That's what I need. Nina looked up at him, tears streaming down her face. Why me? Really? There have to be 100 people more qualified. David's expression softened even more. Because 3 nights ago, I was sitting on your couch, watching you share your last bit of food with my daughters, and I realized something. I'd spent 2 years building walls, pushing people away, convincing myself that emotional distance would protect my girls from more pain. But you showed me that connection is what heals us. Kindness is what saves us. I want to lead with that same spirit, and I can't do it without someone who embodies it. He paused. Plus, Lily and Ella haven't stopped talking about you. They asked if we could find the nice angel lady. Again, that broke her. Nina put her face in her hands and sobbed, all the stress and fear and exhaustion of the past months pouring out. David didn't speak, just let her cry, and somehow that made it better. When she finally looked up, he handed her a tissue. I need time to think, she managed to say. Of course. Take the weekend. The position doesn't officially start until next month anyway. But Nina? He waited until she met his eyes. You deserve this, not because of what you did for me, but because you've been deserving it all along. Someone just needed to notice. Nina walked out of David's office in a daze, clutching the folder against her chest like a lifeline. She made it to the elevator before her knees buckled, and she had to lean against the wall to steady herself. The numbers on that paper felt like a dream, like something that would evaporate the moment she woke up. In the elevator, she opened the folder again just to make sure it was real. It was. She went back to her desk, sat down, and stared at her computer screen without seeing it. Around her, the office continued its usual rhythm, keyboards clicking, phones ringing, Karen's sharp voice cutting through someone's cubicle. But Nina felt like she was watching it all from underwater, distant and muffled. Thompson, Karen's voice snapped her back to reality. Did you finish those reports? Yes, Nina said automatically. They're in your inbox. Karen frowned, clearly disappointed she couldn't find fault. Well, don't just sit there. The filing needs to be done. Nina looked at her boss, really looked at her, and something shifted. For 3 years, she'd absorbed Karen's contempt, convinced she deserved it. But now, sitting here with a job offer that would change her life, she saw Karen differently. Small, petty, someone who built herself up by tearing others down. Actually, Karen, Nina said, her voice steady, I'm taking the rest of the day off. Personal time. Karen's eyes widened. Excuse. Me? You can't just... I can, actually. I have 43 hours of unused personal time. I'm using 8 of them. I'll see you Monday. Nina grabbed her purse and walked out before Karen could respond, her heart pounding but her head high. Behind her, she could hear Karen sputtering, but she didn't care. She was done being small. She was done being invisible. Outside, the winter air hit her face, cold and sharp and real. Nina walked without direction, just needing to move, to process, to feel. She found herself at the park near her apartment, sitting on the same bench where she'd first seen David and his daughters. She pulled out her phone and stared at it, wanting to call someone, to share this moment, but realizing she had no one to call. Her brother was too sick to burden with this. Her mother was gone. She had co-workers but no friends, acquaintances but no confidants. The loneliness of that realization hurt almost as much as the poverty had. Nina sat there as the sun moved across the sky, trying to figure out what she was supposed to do next. Accept the job? Turn it down? Could she really be a director? What if she failed? What if everyone discovered she was a fraud? By the time she made it home, it was dark. Nina heated up a can of soup, the cheap kind that tasted like salt and regret, and sat at her kitchen table with the folder open in front of her. She read through everything carefully, the salary, the benefits, the job description. It all seemed impossible, like a fairy tale someone had written specifically for her. The weekend passed in a blur of anxiety and second-guessing. Nina called the hospital and learned her brother's condition had stabilized, which felt like a small miracle. She cleaned her apartment, did laundry, tried to distract herself, but her mind kept returning to David's words. "You deserve this." Did she? Nina had spent so long believing she was meant to struggle, that comfort and success were for other people, that she'd forgotten how to imagine anything different. Her mother had worked 3 jobs and still died in debt. Nina had assumed she'd follow the same path, but now someone was offering her a different road, and she didn't know if she was brave enough to take it. On Sunday evening, Nina's phone rang. Unknown number again. Her heart jumped. "Hello? Nina? It's David. I hope it's okay that I'm calling. I got your number from your employee file." "It's okay," Nina said, surprised by how calm her voice sounded. "I wanted to check in, see how you were doing. No pressure about the decision. I meant what I said about taking time to think. I just wanted to make sure you were all right." Nina felt something warm bloom in her chest. When was the last time someone had checked on her just to see if she was all right? "I'm overwhelmed," she admitted. "I keep reading the offer and convincing myself it's a mistake." "It's not a mistake," David said gently. "But I understand the doubt. Can I tell you something? When my wife died, everyone told me I needed to get back to work, to stay busy, to push through. So I did. I threw myself into building my company, convinced that if I could just make enough money, buy enough things, create enough success, the pain would go away. But it didn't. The girls and I were drowning, and I was too proud to admit it. That night on the bench, I'd hit bottom, and then you showed up and reminded me that strength isn't about doing everything alone. It's about accepting help when you need it, and offering it when you can." Nina's throat tightened. "I'm scared I'll fail." "Then you'll fail," David said simply, "and you'll get up and try again. That's what life is, Nina. But I don't think you're going to fail. I think you're going to be extraordinary." After they hung up, Nina sat in the dark for a long time. Then she opened her laptop and typed out an email. "Dear Mr. Matthews, I accept your offer. Thank you for seeing me when no one else did. I won't let you down. Sincerely, Nina Thompson." Her finger hovered over the send button for 30 seconds before she pressed it. The whoosh of the email leaving felt like jumping off a cliff. Monday morning, Nina walked into Ridgeway Enterprises with her head high. She went straight to Karen's office and submitted her 2 weeks' notice. Karen's face cycled through shock, disbelief, and finally anger. "You'll never get a reference from me," she spat. "I don't need one," Nina said calmly. "I've been promoted to Director of Employee Wellness. I'll be working on the executive floor." The color drained from Karen's face. "That's impossible. You don't have the qualifications for—" "Apparently, I do. Have a good day, Karen." Nina walked away, and for the first time in 3 years, she felt light. The next 2 weeks passed in a whirlwind. Nina met with David and the other executives to discuss her new role. She attended meetings where people actually listened to her ideas. She was given an office with a window, a real window that looked out over the city. Every morning, she had to pinch herself to make sure it was real, but not everyone was happy about her promotion. Whispers followed her through the halls. Nina overheard conversations that stopped abruptly when she approached. People wondered how someone from data entry could become a director overnight. The word favoritism floated through the office like poison. On her 3rd day in the new role, Nina was in the break room making coffee when two women from accounting walked in. They didn't see her at first, hidden behind the refrigerator door. "I heard she's sleeping with him," one of them said. "That's the only explanation." "She probably planned the whole thing," the other replied. "Poor guy probably felt obligated after she guilted him with that sob story about her sick brother." Nina's hands shook as she poured her coffee. She wanted to confront them, to defend herself, but her mother's voice echoed in her head. "Don't. Lower yourself to their level." She walked out without saying a word, but the comments burned. The rumors intensified. By the end of the week, Nina heard at least 5 different versions of how she'd manipulated her way into the position. Some said she'd blackmailed David. Others claimed she'd fabricated the story about helping him. A particularly cruel version suggested she'd deliberately sought out the new CEO to seduce him. Nina tried to ignore it, but each whisper was like a paper cut, small but cumulative. On Friday afternoon, David called her into his office. Nina's stomach dropped, convinced he'd heard the rumors and was going to take back the offer. Instead, he gestured to the chair across from him with a warm smile. "I want to show you something," he said, turning his laptop toward her. On the screen was a presentation titled Company-Wide Town Hall, Monday, 10 a.m. He clicked through the slides, and Nina's breath caught. The presentation outlined her new programs: mental health resources, flexible scheduling, childcare assistance, employee recognition initiatives. Her ideas, her vision, presented professionally and ready to share with the entire company. "I'm announcing these changes at the town hall," David said, "and I'm introducing you as the director leading the charge. Every employee in this building will be there." Nina's heart raced. "David, there are rumors. People are saying terrible things about how I got this position. If you put me in front of everyone, it's just going to make it worse." David's expression hardened. "I know about the rumors, and that's exactly why we're doing this. Nina, I won't let people diminish your accomplishments or question your integrity. You earned this position, not because of what you did for me, but because you're exactly the person this company needs, and everyone is going to know that." Monday morning arrived too quickly. Nina dressed carefully in a new suit she'd bought over the weekend, armor against the judgment she knew was coming. The town hall was being held in the largest conference room, and by the time Nina arrived, it was packed. Hundreds of employees filled the seats and lined the walls, their conversations creating a low buzz of anticipation. Nina stood at the back, trying to make herself invisible, but David spotted her and gestured for her to join him at the front. She walked through the crowd, feeling every eye on her, hearing the whispers that followed in her wake. Her face burned, but she kept her head up. David stepped up to the podium, and the room fell silent. "Thank you all for coming. I know many of you have questions about the changes happening at Ridgeway Enterprises. I want to address those questions directly and introduce you to someone who's going to help transform this company." He clicked to the first slide, which showed a simple question. "What makes a company great?" David let the question hang in the air before continuing. "For too long, we've measured success by profits alone. But a company is only as strong as its people, and people are more than just productivity metrics. They're human beings with families, with struggles, with dreams that extend beyond these walls." Nina watched him speak, saw the attention of every person in the room fixed on him. David had a presence that commanded respect, but more than that, he had authenticity. He wasn't reading from a script, he was speaking from the heart. "3 weeks ago, I was at the lowest point of my life," David said, and Nina's breath caught. "I was sitting on a bench in the snow with my 2 daughters, homeless for the night because I'd made a mistake. I was the new CEO of this company, but in that moment, I was just a father who'd failed his children. And then a stranger showed me kindness that changed everything." The room was silent now, every person leaning forward. David clicked to the next slide, which showed Nina's employee photo. "This is Nina Thompson. Some of you may have heard rumors about her promotion. Let me tell you the truth." Nina's heart hammered as David recounted the entire story, how she'd offered shelter to strangers, shared her last meal, given up her bed despite having so little herself. He didn't mention that she'd been struggling financially or that her mother had just died, respecting her privacy, but he made clear the sacrifice she'd made. "Nina didn't know who I was," David continued, his voice thick with emotion. She didn't help me to get ahead or to gain anything. She helped me because it was the right thing to do. And in doing so, she reminded me what kind of leader I wanted to be and what kind of company I wanted to build. A company that values compassion, that sees employees as whole people, that understands success means nothing if we lose our humanity along the way. He gestured for Nina to join him at the podium. Her legs felt like jelly, but she forced herself to walk forward. David stepped aside, giving her the microphone. Nina looked out at the sea of faces, some skeptical, some curious, some openly hostile. "I know some of you have questions about my qualifications," Nina said, her voice shaking slightly. "The truth is, I don't have an MBA. I don't have years of management experience. What I do have is 3 years of working in this building, seeing how policies affect real people. I know what it's like to choose between paying rent and buying groceries. I know what it's like to miss important family moments because you can't afford to take time off. I know what it's like to feel invisible, to work hard and never be recognized, to wonder if anyone cares whether you show up or not." Her voice grew stronger as she continued. "I'm not here because I manipulated anyone or because I traded favors. I'm here because Mr. Matthews believes this company can be better, and he's giving me the chance to help make that happen. I'm going to build programs that support you not just as employees, but as people, mental health resources, childcare assistance, flexible scheduling, recognition initiatives. I'm going to fight for you, the way I wish someone had fought for me." Nina paused, looking directly at the women from accounting who'd gossiped about her. "And if you think I don't deserve to be here, that's okay. Watch what I do. Judge me by my actions, not by rumors. I plan to earn your respect through my work, not demand it because of my title." The room erupted in applause. Not everyone clapped. Nina could see clusters of people standing with their arms crossed, but enough did that it felt like validation. David smiled at her, pride evident in his expression, and Nina felt something shift inside her. Maybe she could do this. Maybe she was enough. Over the next month, Nina threw herself into her new role with everything she had. She launched a mental health helpline staffed by trained counselors. She partnered with local childcare centers to offer employees discounted rates. She implemented flexible scheduling that allowed parents to adjust their hours around school pickups. She created an employee recognition program that highlighted exceptional work from all levels of the company, not just management. The response was overwhelming. Nina's email inbox flooded with thank you messages from employees who'd been struggling in silence. A single mother in customer service wrote about how the childcare assistance meant she could finally afford quality care for her son. A man in IT shared that the mental health helpline had literally saved his life when he'd been contemplating suicide. An elderly woman in facilities management cried in Nina's office, thanking her for the flexible scheduling that allowed her to care for her dying husband. Every story reinforced that this work mattered. Nina wasn't just changing policies, she was changing lives. But the work was also exhausting. She spent 12-hour days meeting with employees, reviewing programs, and fighting for budget allocations. Some of the older executives resisted her initiatives, calling them soft or financially irresponsible. Nina had to learn to be tough, to fight for what she believed in, to hold her ground, even when people tried to intimidate her. David supported her through it all. He attended her presentations, backed her proposals, and made it clear that her programs were a priority. They had lunch together once a week, sometimes discussing work, sometimes just talking about life. Lily and Ella would join them occasionally, and Nina found herself growing attached to the girls. They'd draw her pictures, tell her about school, ask when she'd come over for dinner. 6 weeks into her new role, Nina realized that her relationship with David had evolved into something deeper than professional respect. She looked forward to their meetings too much. She caught herself thinking about him at odd moments. She noticed the way his eyes crinkled when he smiled, the patience he showed with his daughters, the quiet strength that radiated from him. But she pushed those feelings down. David was her boss. He'd given her this incredible opportunity, and the last thing she wanted was to complicate it or give fuel to the people who already believed she'd used him to get ahead. She kept things professional, maintaining appropriate boundaries even when her heart wanted to lean closer. One evening, Nina was working late when David knocked on her office door. "You're here past 8 again," he said. "You need to go home." "Just finishing up this proposal," Nina replied, not looking up from her laptop. David walked in and gently closed the laptop. "Nina, you're going to burn out. I know the feeling, I've been there. But you can't help anyone if you destroy yourself in the process." Nina leaned back in her chair, suddenly aware of how tired she was. "There's just so much to do. So many people counting on these programs. I can't let them down." "You won't," David said softly. "But you also can't save everyone. Trust me, I've tried. Sometimes the best thing you can do is take care of yourself, so you have the strength to keep going." Nina looked up at him, and something passed between them, electric and undeniable. David seemed to feel it too, because he stepped back, putting professional distance between them. "Go home, Nina. That's an order from your boss." Nina smiled despite herself. "Yes, sir." 3 months after her promotion, Ridgeway Enterprises won an award for Best Workplace Culture from a major business publication. The article specifically mentioned Nina's programs and their impact on employee satisfaction and retention. At the awards ceremony, Nina stood on stage accepting the trophy, looking out at the audience, and caught David's eye. He was beaming with pride, and in that moment, Nina felt a surge of emotion so powerful it nearly knocked her over. She'd done it. She'd actually done something meaningful. But the true test came a week later, when the brother's condition suddenly deteriorated. He was rushed to the hospital with complications, and Nina got the call at work. She grabbed her purse and ran, not even thinking about asking permission or filing paperwork. She just ran. At the hospital, she found her brother in ICU, machines beeping, tubes everywhere. The doctors said the next 48 hours were critical. Nina sat by his bed, holding his hand, praying to a God she wasn't sure she believed in anymore. Her phone buzzed with work emails, but she ignored them. Nothing mattered except her brother. 24 hours passed, then 36. Nina didn't leave the hospital, surviving on vending machine coffee and crackers. On the second day, a nurse came in and told her she had a visitor. Nina expected it to be one of her brother's friends, but instead, David walked in carrying a bag from a nearby deli. "What are you doing here?" Nina asked, her voice hoarse from crying. "Making sure you eat something," David said simply. He pulled out a sandwich, fruit, and a bottle of water. "And making sure you know that your job is safe. Your brother's medical bills are covered under our expanded health insurance, and you can take as much time as you need." Nina stared at him. "You didn't have to come here." "Yes, I did," David said. "Because that's what friends do. They show up." Something broke open in Nina's chest. She started crying again, but this time it was different, not tears of fear, but of gratitude, of relief, of feeling seen and supported in a way she never had before. David sat with her for 3 hours, not saying much, just being present. When he finally left, he squeezed her shoulder and said, "Your brother is strong. He's going to make it." He was right. On the third day, her brother's condition stabilized. Within a week, he was moved out of ICU. The doctors called it a miracle, but Nina knew it was a combination of good medicine and sheer stubborn will. When she finally returned to work 2 weeks later, exhausted but relieved, she found her office filled with flowers and cards from colleagues she barely knew, all expressing their support. David called her into his office that afternoon. "How are you holding up?" "Better," Nina said honestly. "My brother is going to be okay. It's going to be a long recovery, but he's going to make it." "I'm glad," David said. Then he hesitated, looking uncharacteristically nervous. "Nina, I need to tell you something. And I need you to know I've thought about this carefully, considering our professional relationship and the implications, but I can't keep pretending anymore." Nina's heart started racing. "Okay, I'm in love with you," David said, the words tumbling out. "I've been in love with you since that night you opened your door to us. I know it complicates things. I know people will talk. But life is too short and too fragile to waste time pretending we don't feel what we feel. My daughters adore you. I adore you. And if there's any chance you might feel the same way, I needed to tell you." Nina sat frozen, her mind reeling. Every logical part of her brain screamed about professional boundaries and office politics and rumors that would explode if they were together. But her heart, her tired, battered, hopeful heart, knew the answer before her brain could catch up. "I love you too," she whispered. "I've been trying not to, but I do." David's face broke into the biggest smile she'd ever seen. He stood up and walked around his desk, and Nina stood to meet him. When he kissed her, gentle and reverent, it felt like coming home. "People are going to say I'm using you," Nina said when they pulled apart. "Let them," David replied. "We know the truth, and anyone who matters will see it too." They kept their relationship quiet at first, but word eventually spread. As Nina had predicted, some people whispered about favoritism and scandal, but others saw two people who'd found each other through kindness and connection, who supported each other through their darkest moments. And as Nina continued to excel in her role, proving her worth through actions rather than words, the negative voices grew quieter. 6 months later, on a Saturday afternoon by the lake, David got down on one knee in front of his daughters. Lily and Ella were holding a sign they'd made themselves that said, "Will you be our mom?" David pulled out a simple gold ring and asked Nina to marry him. Through tears of joy, Nina said, yes. The wedding was small and intimate, held by the same lake where David had proposed. Nina's brother, fully recovered, walked her down the aisle. Lily and Ella served as flower girls, their faces glowing with happiness. As Nina and David exchanged vows, promising to love and support each other through whatever came next, Nina thought about that cold night in the snow when she'd almost walked past a family in need. One moment of kindness had changed everything. One choice to help despite having so little had led to this, a career she loved, a family she cherished, a life she'd never dared to imagine. As they walked back down the aisle hand in hand, Lily and Ella holding onto their free hands, Nina felt a peace she'd never known before. That evening, as the sun set over the lake and their small group of guests celebrated, David pulled Nina close. "Thank you," he whispered. "For what?" "For being brave enough to open your door that night, for showing me that strength isn't about doing everything alone, for reminding me what really matters." Nina smiled, thinking of her mother's words that had guided her that night. "If you have even a little to give, you give it." She'd given what little she had, and the universe had given her back everything. "Thank you for seeing me," Nina replied, "for recognizing my worth when I couldn't see it myself." As the stars came out overhead and music drifted across the water, Nina realized this wasn't an ending but a beginning. There would be challenges ahead, struggles and setbacks, and moments of doubt. But they'd face them together, built on a foundation of kindness, respect, and love that had started with one woman choosing compassion over convenience on a cold winter night. And that, Nina thought as she danced with her new husband while their daughters laughed nearby, made all the difference. If this story touched your heart, don't forget to subscribe to Soul Story for more inspiring tales of kindness, redemption, and love. Leave a comment below telling us about a time when a small act of kindness changed your life, and hit that like button to help us share these stories with others who need to hear them. Remember, you never know how one moment of compassion might transform someone's entire world. Until next time, keep spreading kindness wherever you go.